Hi, and welcome to your math class with Miss Stanford. Before we begin, please get out your math journal and a pencil. I would love to have you guys work along with me today. I think it would be beneficial for you and it would be awesome. So let's get busy. Today in math class, we are going to be exploring ratios. I want you guys to kind of start thinking about how you've used ratios before, where you've seen ratios, how you can use them, what even is a ratio. Think about all these things. I'll give you guys a couple seconds to jot down some notes in your math journal. I guess our first question should be, what is a ratio? I want you to be thinking along with this video in your mind. I don't want to just be giving you the answer, so think about, what is a ratio? A ratio is a ratio compares numbers in a set order. So for example, let's look at the green box in the lower right hand corner. This box has a picture of 3 males and 1 female. So the ratio of men to women in the green box is 3 males to 1 female, and the ratio of women to men in the box is 1 female to 3 males. So we're going to look at today's problem. And like I said earlier, I want you to work along with me, so make sure you have your math journal and a pencil ready to go. For today's problem, we're going to be looking at ABC Middle School. In ABC Middle School, there are 240 boys and 260 girls. We want to know, what is the ratio of the number of girls to the number of boys? I want you to start thinking about how we're going to figure out that problem. How are we going to figure out the ratio of the number of girls to boys? Do you have any strategies we could use? Think about it. So when looking at word problems, we need to remember that we only need the important information. Sometimes in word problems there's a lot of fluff information. In our word problem today, it's pretty short, so we don't have a lot of fluff information, but there's still information that's not needed. Such as, do we need to know that it's ABC Middle School? No, we don't. We need to know the number of boys and the number of girls. So there are 240 boys and 260 girls. We also need to take a look at our problem. We need to know the ratio of the number of girls to the number of boys. Our question is really important in this kind of problem because we need to know that we're looking at the ratio of the number of girls to the number of boys. So when we're writing our ratio, the number of girls is going to be before the number of boys. Otherwise, if we switched it, that wouldn't be what the question is asking. So we need to pay close attention to that and make sure we remember that. So you might want to write that down in your journal. Like I said, our word problem is really important in the way that we are setting up our problem. So when we set up the ratio form, what does that look like for us? Remember, we want the number of girls to the number of boys. So we're looking for the number of girls to the number of boys, and I talked a little bit ago about why that's important, but we want to make sure that our problem is set up correctly so we end up getting the correct answer. So our ratio should look like this. Has the number of girls over the number of boys. But is this the only way that we can set up this ratio, or is there another way to do that? Try exploring this in your journal. Try and see if you can figure out the other way to write the ratio correctly. There are two ways to write this ratio. The second way to write this ratio is the number of girls colon the number of boys. It's basically the same thing as the fraction we looked at in the first place, but it's just on the side. It's just a different way to look at it. Whichever way you choose to do it is perfectly fine. Next, we need to take that ratio that we just made and input our numbers into that ratio so it makes sense for our problem. If you want to, go ahead and try doing that in your math journal and see if you get it correct. So here we have both forms of the ratio that we just made. So the first one on the top is the number of girls over the number of boys, and it's important you're putting the correct number in the correct spot. So we had 260 girls and 240 boys. So we have the 260 over the 240. The second way is the number of girls with the colon to the number of boys, and that equals 260 colon 240. Did you get this correct in your math journal? So now that we've got our ratio written correctly in two different ways, our next step, what is that? Next we need to figure out the GFC, or the greatest common factor. So as a review, let's talk about the GFC. The greatest common factor is the greatest factor that divides two numbers. We need to find that for both the numbers and our ratio. How do we do that? If you think you may know, try in your journal. So what do we do with our numbers now? So looking at our ratio, we had 260 to 240. If you wrote the ratio in the other form, that's totally okay too. It's still the same thing. But looking at our numbers, we know we can cross off both the zeros because they both end in a zero. So now we're looking at the ratio of 26 to 24. Crossing off both the zeros is just another way to easily reduce quickly. So what do we do now? Now what's our next step? Now we must find the GFC, or greatest common factor, of the numbers 24 and 26. Why those numbers? Because those are the numbers that we just reduced to. So we are going to start with the number 24. So the first thing that we need to do is figure out what numbers are factors of 24. Factors of the number 24 are 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, and 12. Because when you multiply those numbers together, you can get the number 24. So we just found the factors for the number 24, so now we need to look at the factors of the number 26. Try and figure out what they are in your math journal. Factors of the number 26 are 2 and 13. Yes, there are only two factors of this number because those are the only two numbers you can multiply to get 26 besides 26 and 1. So if we look at the factors for both our numbers 24 and 26, let's review. 24 was 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, and 12, and 26 was only 2 and 13. So now we need to figure out what our greatest common factor is. Can you tell what it is? Looking at the factors for both numbers, we can tell that our greatest common factor is 2. How do we know our greatest common factor is 2? Because that's the only number that both these numbers have in common. That is the biggest number that can divide into both 24 and the number 26. So that is the greatest common factor. So now knowing our greatest common factor is 2, what are we supposed to do next? What do we do with the number 2? We need to take our ratio 260 to 240, but don't forget we crossed off the zeros. So now we're looking at 26 to 24. That was just our easy way of reducing it. So we take that ratio and now we divide by our greatest common factor. We need to divide both numbers. So 26 to 24 and divide 26 by 2 and 24 by 2. So let's look at our first problem. 26 divided by 2. What does that equal? I want you to work it and try and figure it out in your math journal. I'll give you a couple of extra seconds to do so. We'll check our answers together in a minute. "26 divided by 2 is 13. Did you get it right? If not, that's okay. So 2 goes into 2 one time, and 2 goes into 6 3 times. So we now have the number 13. So what about 24 divided by 2? I want you to take some time and try and do this one in your math journal as well. Remember, if you get it wrong, it's okay, but try your hardest. I know you can do it. Two goes into 24 12 times because 2 goes into 2 once and 2 goes into 4 twice. I hope you got it right. Good job if you did. So now we have the numbers 13 and 12. 13 coming from the 26, the number of girls, and the 24 coming from the number of boys. So now our ratio is 13 to 12. We figured it out. So now we know that for every 13 girls, there are 12 boys in ABC Middle School. Remember, this is only one way to write this ratio. The other way is the 13 over the 12, kind of looking like a fraction. That way is acceptable as well because it's the same thing. But either way, you would say the ratio is 13 to 12. Good job, guys. So there are 13 girls in ABC Middle School to every 12 boys. You guys did some awesome work today, and I am super proud. So keep up the good work. So now we're going to start working on part 2. We're going to be looking at more about ratios using the same problem. So keep your math journals and your pencils handy, and we're about to get started. Hang in there, guys. You're doing great. We're going to be looking at our same beginning problem. So in ABC Middle School, there are 260 girls and 240 boys. So we're using the same information, but this time we want to know the ratio of the number of boys to the number of students in the school. So what do we do next? Do we have all of the information we need? So in order to figure out how many boys there are to the number of students in the school, we still need to know how many students there are total because the problem didn't tell us that exactly. If we know there are 260 girls and 240 boys, what should we do with those two numbers to figure out how many students there are in the whole school? You're right, we need to add those two numbers in order to figure out the total number of students in the whole school. So we take our two numbers, our total number of boys, and we add it to our total number of girls. So we end up with 240 plus 260. So, solving this, we know 0 plus 0 equals 0. 6 plus 4 equals 10. So you write down your 0, carry your 1. 2 plus 2 plus 1 equals 5. So we get an answer of 500 students. So now we have our missing number. We know there are 500 students total in the whole school. So what do we need next? Now we need to set up our new ratio. Try and do it in your math journal. Write it down, try and figure it out. What's our new ratio? So we're looking at a new ratio of 240 to 500. We have it written both ways here because remember both ways are correct. We have the 240 boys and the 500 total students. Now what do we need to do next? We need to find our greatest common factor. Remember, looking back at our ratio, it was 240 over 500. So they both end with that 0 again. So you can go ahead and cross that 0 off, and now we're left with 24 over 50, or 24 to 50. So, like we did earlier, we're finding factors for the number 24 again. Those factors are 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, and 12. Next, we need to find factors for the number 50, because that's our next number. The factors of the number 50 are 2, 5, 10, and 25. So now we're going to look at our factors of both our numbers and we're going to figure out what the greatest common factor is. Remember, that's the biggest number that they both have in common. So what do you think our greatest common factor here is? Look at both sets of numbers. Again, like earlier, our greatest common factor is 2, because 2 is the biggest number that goes into both 50 and 24. Next, again, we need to divide both the numbers in our ratio by our greatest common factor, which we just figured out was 2. So we have to divide 24 by 2 as well as 50 by 2. So try and do this by yourself in your math journal. I'll give you a few seconds to try and do that. We'll check our answers in a minute. So at the top, we have 2 divided by 24 is 12 because 2 goes into 2 one time and 2 goes into 4 twice. So, and then our bottom number is 2 divided by 50 because 2 goes into 2, 2 goes into 5 twice. Carry that 1 over, 2 goes into 10 5 times. So, our new numbers are 12 and 25. So now what do we do with our numbers that we just found, 12 and 25? Now we put that into our new ratio. So now we know our new ratio is 12 boys to 25 total students. So in ABC Middle School, there are 12 boys to every 25 students. You guys did awesome. So now I would like to challenge you guys to do some sort of ratio in your own school or in your own classroom. Figure out the number of girls to the number of boys there are. Figure out the number of students that there are. Any sort of ratio you can come up with. Remember what to do after that. Let's review the steps we took. We found our ratio, we reduced it, we found our greatest common factor for both numbers, and then we divided both numbers by that greatest common factor. What did we do after we divided? Well, we came up with our new ratio. So I really think that this guy would be fun for you guys. You can do it any way you want. You can create a ratio about anything in your classroom. You could create a ratio that's as simple as favorite flavors of ice cream in the classroom. You could do how many people like chocolate versus how many people like vanilla. You can fit multiple types of data into a ratio. So I really challenge you guys to work together and create some sort of ratio project. Thank you guys so much for watching today, and I hope you learned lots about ratios. Keep up the good work.